Good afternoon. On today's Angry Bulletin, a new UFO whistleblower is telling his story of a colossal craft that appeared over the Vandenberg Air Force Base back in 2003. Apparently, this craft, glowing red and roughly squarish or rectangular in shape, was the size of a football field, and for some reason has gone largely unreported up to this point until now. All of this and more coming at you on the Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon. Once again, welcome to the Angry Astronaut. So, got my sunglasses back, as many of you have probably noticed, and they're going to be here to stay. All of that having been said, let me go ahead and talk about something a lot more serious as well. Even though I believe I'll be releasing this video tomorrow, I would like to make sure that I offer all of my sympathies and all of my support for members of the Commonwealth who are recognizing Remembrance Day today, because I'm recording this on Sunday, and it's a significant day for me as well, because my grandfather served in the Great War, in the First World War in 1917. He was going to be sent to the trenches in the Ardennes, where many of his friends and comrades were killed, oftentimes in the first day of action. It was a brutal and bloody conflict, took the lives of millions of people, and a pointless conflict as well, by the way. A tragic one that really all of the soldiers involved, regardless of whether they fought for the Allies or the Central Powers, were victims. But my grandfather survived because of the actions of one man. His commanding officer made the decision that he just saw something in him, in my grandfather Charles, that was unusual. He thought that he was a bit more clever than some other recruits and that he would be better suited to a job in communications, and he got him transferred. My grandfather didn't know Morse code, but he picked it up really quickly and served in communications for the rest of the war. That very probably saved his life, because very few of the men that he came over with in 1917 survived and returned home. And in addition to that, because of those valuable skills that he learned during the Great War, during the time of the Depression, he had a solid job with the Northern Pacific Railroad in North Dakota all the way through, and was able to support his family the whole time. And I guess the reason I wanted to tell all of you that is it's the one of the main reasons actually that I'm wearing this poppy. Obviously, I want to support the people of Britain, the people of the whole Commonwealth, by the way, in this particular day. But nevertheless, I also wanted to make sure that all of you understood that I have a personal connection to this day as well. And all of my sympathies to the men who were lost in that horrible conflict, whether they served with Canada or Britain or Australia or New Zealand. And actually recently, this day has been extended to include soldiers who served with the Germans as well, Austro-Hungarians, the Ottoman Empire, so many people who needlessly died in that horrific conflict over a century ago. Okay, on to a discussion of UAPs. So one of the most controversial things that David Grush talked about when he was speaking to the media regarding a number of the famous cases that he had heard about was the fact that he had heard or seen evidence or information about an enormous UFO that appeared at Vandenberg Air Force Base, a UFO that was the size of a football field. This is one of the stories that really got him into a bit of hot water with some of the mainstream media, who are saying this guy's stories are just getting more ridiculous every time he tells them. And some were thinking that he was just making this stuff up, and there wasn't even a story of a football field-sized UFO out there, at least not as far as the military was concerned. And that is simply untrue. There was indeed, in 2003, a significant event that involved many, many witnesses at Vandenberg Air Force Base, a huge UFO. As I said before, at least 100 yards across. Glowed red, was rectangular or squarish in shape, not a cube, but more of sort of a flat object. At least that's the way it was described. And not only did it show up once, the following night, in front of new witnesses, it appeared again.
My next question would actually be for Mr. Graves. Can you please explain to me in detail the event that occurred at Vandenberg Air Force Base?
Certainly. In the 2003 timeframe, a large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg Air Force Base when they observed a very large 100-yard sided red square approach the base from the ocean and hover at low altitude over one of the launch facilities. This object remained for about 45 seconds or so before darting off over the mountains. There was a similar event within 24 hours later in the evening. This was a morning event, I believe 8:45 in the morning. Later in the evening, post-sunset, there were reports of other sightings on base, including some aggressive behaviors. These objects were approaching some of the security guards at rapid speeds before darting off. And this is information that was received through one of the witnesses that have approached me at Americans for Safe Aerospace.
Was this documented in any official form, whether it was a police blotter?
Yes, they had official documentation and records from the event that the witness held over the years.
And I'm not going to ask you to do it right now for time reasons, but you would be able to sketch what was witnessed, correct?
It was this testimony that led Jeff Nuscatelli, a security officer who was at the Vandenberg Air Force Base immediately after the first incident and during the occurrence of the second incident, to come forward and tell his story of what happened on the Merged podcast, which was hosted, by the way, by Ryan Graves. Now, the casual viewer might think that the Vandenberg Air Force Base is the most ridiculous location for a huge UFO to show up without tons of people seeing it, because it is, after all, on the west coast of California, one of the most heavily populated regions of the United States. However, if you look at Santa Barbara County itself, by design, this region does not have heavily populated cities anywhere near the Air Force Base. Santa Barbara itself actually is way down in the southwest corner of the county, and the only other major town in the region is Santa Maria, which is an agricultural town inland. The actual Pacific Coast region where this UAP supposedly approached from is virtually uninhabited, aside from the military personnel who were there. In any event, according to Nucitelli, he had just shown up for his shift change at Vandenberg Air Force Base after the first sighting had occurred on the morning of October 14th, 2003. He said he knew something was up because when he arrived, about a dozen people were gathered around the smoke pit, and they all started telling him about this UFO event that had taken place. Now, at first, of course, he thought that this was some sort of prank, because apparently these security patrolmen tend to play pranks on each other all the time, but he found out that they were not only being very serious, they also had written documentation of sworn statements that had been given by many of the witnesses concerned. So apparently they had received a call from the test ranges for the rockets, specifically a location known as LF-21. Now, this is a significant location because Minuteman ICBMs used to be housed here and were frequently tested. However, a new technology was being tested, a weapon system designed to intercept intercontinental ballistic missiles. And as I said before, this is a new technology, a new weapon system, and the contractors who were working on all of this reported that a gigantic football field-sized red square Square UFO was hovering over the facility. Now, most of us probably know that this is not the first time that UFOs have been spotted hovering over facilities involved with strategic nuclear weapons or new weapon systems. And again, it's a very interesting coincidence that this object chooses to show up at roughly the same time as we're testing a new weapon system. Now, as far as the witnesses are concerned, these were all contractors from Boeing, people with extremely high security clearances. And instead of giving you my own opinion, I'd like to relate to you an article, or rather an excerpt from an article that appeared on Barstool that I thought was extremely well written and had a good explanation as to why these sorts of witnesses should be believed. By the way, the journalist's name was Jerry Thornton. Quote, "I respect good, healthy skepticism, but you can listen to a rational, intelligent, highly competent U.S. Air Force security officer calmly describe these events and think he's lying, and I'll politely offer that your skepticism is neither good nor healthy. Once again, I have to point out that this testimony is coming from the best that this country produces. Nucitelli isn't some unsophisticated hayseed seeing lights in the sky after downing a pint of Southern Comfort while hunting squirrels with his dog. He's a man who has been given the task of overseeing security at one of our most important facilities. The people he was in charge of, whose statements he took, had top security clearance. If we don't trust that they saw a 100-yard wide UFO hovering over Vandenberg Air Force Base, or think that it was just Jupiter or a weather balloon or whatever, then you have to assume that we've got much bigger problems than giant red squares flying at will around our most sensitive installations. Nucitelli collected the sworn statements, some of which he's able to produce today apparently, and he began looking for the UFO. Intrigued, as many people were, by the story, he began to search the facility and even ventured outside it along the Pacific coast. And at that point, he started feeling a bit nervous because he was by himself and a long ways away for any kind of backup in case anything showed up. It would be a little threatening and a little difficult to do anything about. So he was beginning to get ready to go back when all of a sudden calls began to come in over the radio. Calls from the other end of the base where apparently security personnel were seeing more UFOs. At first, it was just lights on the horizon that seemed to be moving strangely and erratically, but then all of a sudden they began bearing down on the base and on the personnel themselves, and they became extremely frightened. According to Nucitelli, the object approached strangely and erratically and got bigger and brighter as it came in. They started screaming over the radio, "It's coming right at us! It's coming right for us! Now it's right here!" And he said it was hard to hear because they were screaming and they were scared. And apparently, these things it was a single object. Some say it looked like the red square. Others had other descriptions. And once again, these are descriptions 20 years after the fact, so it's kind of difficult to get consistency with all of that. But apparently, it came at a high rate of speed, flew right up to the entry control point, and stopped. They all stared at it, and then suddenly it just shot off, heading towards the west like the other object had done. And by the way, if you're an alien that wants to make a quick escape over an area that doesn't have a whole lot of observers, well, that's the direction you want to go because it's one of the largest national forests in all of the United States in that direction. So once again, if this was indeed true, there weren't a whole lot of people that could have seen this object aside from the people who happened to be in the area when it approached the Air Force Base. Once again, statements were taken, records were kept, but nothing was said publicly about this until some vague mentions of this incident took place in 2017. A story circulated about the media to some degree, and at that point, Nucitelli thought that it was all going to come out, But as the years went by and nothing else happened, he finally decided to testify, given the fact that all of this had been talked about so openly in Congress just a few months ago. So this is the first time that we're getting all of this information in such detail. Once again, it's a fantastic story without any sort of corroborating evidence. There's no photographs, there's no radar records, there's absolutely nothing to confirm that any of this really happened except for the credibility of the witnesses. What we need at this point is access to these Boeing contractors who reported the object in the first place, but in my opinion, that's unlikely to happen. People with high-level security clearances are most probably not going to be talking about encounters with UFOs. Even today, when the government is trying to encourage people to come forward, because frankly, there's still a tremendous stigma being attached to anybody who talks about UFOs publicly. Even I'm being subjected to that at this point, given that my channel was almost exclusively devoted to spaceflight and space science, and now that some of my content has drifted elsewhere, well, a lot of people are pretty unhappy about it. But I maintain that what we have right now is substantially different than what we had a few years ago in terms of credible witnesses and also in footage like this being delivered to us not by people who can modify it with fancy CGI, but by various government agencies who have studied it in great detail. It becomes more and more interesting with every passing day, and I think that it needs to be reported on given the potential significance of what we're talking about. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Glenn Chittister, for becoming my latest Patreon supporter. Really appreciate your help, and it's people like you that allow me to bring you content like this, especially when this sort of content involves me traveling, which I'm about to do back to the United States, hopefully to pursue some interesting UAP stories in the Southwest. So until then, please like, please subscribe, and as always, stay angry about space.